Hey, 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 love and light to each and every one of you guys. Welcome to the Dope Black Chick Podcast, your audio guide to releasing your dopeness.
Hey guys, this week on the show, we're going to be discussing a topic that I've been following and trying to write on for probably about 6 months now, and I just haven't written it out yet because I get so frustrated. Even having this conversation, I get frustrated. But today on the show, guys, we're going to be talking about maternal mortality rates and how it affects Black women in healthcare, and healthcare advocacy for Black women. So on today's show, I have a special guest, Kyla Canzater.
Hi. Canzater.
I was going to say Canzater, but I said, try Canzater. Kyla Canzater of KylaLive.com and Pink Proverb. So she's going to be on and discuss this with us today because, for one, she's a dope Black chick, and two, we've already had this conversation, and she has some personal knowledge of the situation as well. So we're going to be discussing that today. First off, Kyla, just, kind of tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hey guys, so I am Kyla Live on Instagram and on social media. I started a blog called Pink Proverb. Started a blog called pinkproverb.com. That's Clay. He's trying to let you guys know he's here. Just a lifestyle inspirational blog. Kind of started it for myself, but it's evolved into a platform of just talking about women's health and just like living your best life and trying to find the hacks and, just the know-how of how to maneuver through just living with chronic illness and now being a mom of an infant. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. So let's just go ahead and jump into this and talk about, so first off, I had seen the article from Serena Williams, and she talked about the fact that she was not being heard during her childbirth and the complications that she had following childbirth. And, even a person as affluent as her that is just not being heard. She said she had to tell them over and over again, like, no, I need this test, not that test. And she was just so frustrated with the fact that no one would listen to her. And she even acknowledged the fact that, okay, if I wasn't Serena Williams and pushed as many times, I had to push as many times as I had to. Also, having the knowledge of which test I needed saved my life. I saved myself. But there are so many women that don't have the ability to even know which test they need. Two, if they do come back and forth and say, okay, well, I just don't feel that this is right, they're just definitely not going to be heard, and they don't have the status of a Serena Williams to be heard at all. So we have this issue where Black women are dying at 3 times the rate of white women with complications with childbirth. And there's a huge problem there that no one's discussing. And it's not just Serena Williams talking about it. It's other people discussing it. So when I brought it up to Kyla, you also had made a comment about the complications you had. So talk about that.
So one, yes, this is a very important issue. And I think it stems from it doesn't start with just Black women in childbirth. There has been systematic issues in our health system that has pointed to the fact that white women and Black women do not operate the same with their body. And literally there are studies that have been written. For me, I have endometriosis. There were studies that were written that said Black women did not and could not have endometriosis.
Wow.
So for the long time, for years, doctors were treating certain diseases and certain illnesses as something as Black women can't have, or it's impossible for you to be in that kind of pain, or it's impossible for you to have the same thing as your white counterpart. And this is written, and this is something that is systematically wrong. And we have to spend so much time now correcting those wrongs. So even when it comes to childbirth, I haven't really, I've actually done a video about my birthing experience, but I haven't talked about, my experience actually going through a C-section and what that was like, because this is actually Cesarean Awareness Week. And I was approached a couple of days ago to talk about this, but I guess I'll talk about it here first. And,
exclusives.
I know. It's one of those things that, I'm very open about my health, but you have to kind of prep yourself to be ready to have those conversations, because it kind of takes you to a place that isn't happy, right? And for me, my C-section was not something that was planned. I thought that I was going to be able to have a natural birth. Clay was born Labor Day weekend. My doctor was out of town. Every doctor in her practice was out of town, and we had a doctor that knew nothing about me, didn't even know my name before she walked in. So it was very, different. And in my head, I had that same data that you have, right? Like Black women are treated differently, like we're not being heard. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, who's going to advocate for me? Like, right. I don't really know what's going to happen. So when we went to labor and delivery, it started in triage, and she literally told me, the nurses were great, but again, nobody there knows me. They say, okay, well, yeah, you're in labor, but I think it's best that you walk around for about 30, 40 minutes and then come back, because by then you'll be in active labor and we'll be able to, put you in a room. So my husband and I decided to walk to the hospital. We went upstairs on the second floor, and by the time we got to the second floor, I was in so much pain, but the time didn't pass. So, we try to tough it out and just try to keep walking. And by the time we got back down to triage, they didn't have any rooms available.
Wow.
So I'm in excruciating pain, and I can't really describe my pain. I'm just in a lot of pain. And it felt like forever, to the point where she's like, well, just sit in the waiting room for a minute, and once the room becomes available, then we'll put you in there. So by that time, like, I can't even sit still. Like, I'm laid out on a couch.
I can imagine.
In front of the emergency. Yeah, because I honestly can't. I can't fake it. Like, at this point, like, I need to lay down. And I'm laid down on the couch, and literally it's a family there, and I guess their daughter was currently in the back. And I just remember hearing a voice, like, my eyes were closed. I just remember hearing a voice, and the lady came over with her husband, and they were like, what's wrong? Like, why aren't they taking her back? And, my husband said they don't have rooms right now, but they're going to be taking her back soon. And she literally asked, she was like, does she have insurance? Is that the problem, that she doesn't have insurance? Like,
wow.
It was just that blatant that it's like, it's somebody in the emergent, like in the lobby, struggling, and you guys have nowhere to put her. And it's like, okay, sure. So
no priority at all.
No priority. So then we get back to triage, and, she checks me and my water breaks. And she says that Clay had been distressed and he's sitting in meconium. And I'm like, okay, well, if you guys know anything about how hospitals used to treat meconium back in the day, that was an automatic, put her in the room. It's time for her to either push or get this baby out.
Right.
But now they treat it a little bit differently. They'll literally let your baby sit in the meconium. And that's something where, again, like, if my doctor was there, she would have known, like, right away, that's not Kyla's wishes. She doesn't want that to happen. So I'm like, okay. They're like, it's okay. We'll bring you to the back. I went through about 20 hours of labor before Clay was actually delivered. So he's been in meconium that long.
Wow.
Yeah. So by the time we get ready to push, I couldn't get him out. Like, it was, my body was just so excruciating. I was tired. And my epidural was not taking.
Oh my gosh, girl.
But they gave me 2 epidurals. And what was crazy is I was talking to my endo sister not too long ago, and she was saying, her doctor was telling her that her pain medicine wasn't taking because she'd been on pain pills for so long, her metabolism wasn't able to detect the pain medicine the way it should. And I didn't really think about that until like, maybe that was why my epidural wasn't taking, or it wore off so fast.
Right.
Because they turned me up twice with the epidural. It didn't work. I was feeling everything. And they were like, okay, at this point, we either need to do a C-section or, oh, sorry. So for those who just tuning in, I had told I that my son literally just had the biggest poop ever. So yeah, he's still trying to get out. But
oh my goodness,
so
Clay.
I know. At this point, they're like, either you need to have a C-section or we need to suction him out. And again, this is a doctor that I don't know from, we haven't even been on a blind date. I don't know her from Adam and Eve. Like, I don't know her history of being a doctor, and I just didn't feel comfortable with her suctioning my son out. So I did opt to have a C-section, and because my epidural wasn't taking, I had to be put under, which meant that nobody could be in the room with me. That meant that my mom couldn't be there, my husband couldn't be there, and I was asleep when Clay came out. So when I woke up, I saw it was my mom, my dad, and the anesthesiologist in the room. My husband was with Clay. They told me that Clay had made it, but Clay was born not breathing, and they had to resuscitate him through the process. And I just was like, okay, well, when am I going to be able to see him? And I wasn't able to see him until that night. So it probably was about 4 or 5 hours, which to me was a blessing, because usually when a child is born in meconium and goes through that experience, they usually in a NICU for a lot longer. But Clay is a very headstrong child. So we didn't have to go through that process for much longer. But what was crazy after that is I had my C-section. I knew something wasn't necessarily right away. It just, my body just didn't really feel like it was, like the time we got ready to leave the hospital, I just didn't feel like I should leave the hospital. And by then my doctor came back, and we actually were told we needed to stay in the hospital a little bit longer than the regular stay for a C-section. And my doctor came back thinking it was because Clay had gone through his process with the meconium. But then it was because they wanted to evaluate me a little bit longer. And she was like, okay, well, you're good to go. So they did what they usually do. They took my staples out before I left, and they put on the white strips over my cesarean, and, we went home. And I don't know, like, I just was, I was feeling really, really, like, loopy, just not really, like, in a good space. And a couple of days later, I woke up, and my cesarean was pussing. Like, it was just, like, oozing. And I didn't really, even then, I'm, like, in my head, I'm like, okay, well, maybe if I just take a shower, or, because for me, because I've dealt with so much chronic pain, like, I honestly, if it's not a doctor that I'm familiar with, I absolutely hate going to the doctor, because I feel like it's always something that I have to overly explain, or if I don't,
you got to fight about.
Right, or if I don't articulate it properly, then you're not going to believe me in the first place. So, went to the doctor to get it checked out, and I had an infection. And she didn't tell me at the time what type of infection I had, and I don't think I even really wanted to know what type of infection I had. I just was like, okay, well, just, do what you got to do. Like, whatever you got to do, like, just, tell me what I need to take, tell me what we need to do. So she ended up stuffing my wound, which is usually what happens if you have an infection. They stuff it with, like, this little strip to kind of get the pus to come out. And then she gave me antibiotics and sent me on my way. So I'm like, okay, well, this should clear up in a couple of days, and it didn't. And my mom kept saying, like, something's not right. Usually, you know, if you have an infection like that, like, and they give you antibiotics, like, it should only take a couple of days for it to clear up or you to start feeling better. Bless you, Moo, or, you know, for it for you to actually see ease of it. And it was still pressing really bad. My blood pressure dropped, and I was dealing with low blood pressure, just the fact that I was breastfeeding and doing all this other stuff, like a regular mom would do at the time. But it was just taking me, I was going through
a lot of
lot.
trauma on your body. A lot.
Absolutely. So, at the time, my dad was with me the whole time. So I was blessed to have my dad with Clay and I throughout the whole process. So he was at home with us. And I was just like, Dad, something just doesn't feel right. Like, I need to go to the hospital. And, you know, at this point, it's like, I don't want to take my brand new son to the hospital. So I drove myself to the hospital. And after you have a C-section, you're not supposed to drive. But I didn't want my dad. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want my child in the hospital. So I was like, Dad, you stay with Clay. I'm going to drive to the hospital. I went to the hospital. And I'm in the emergency room by myself. And it's like, again, I have to prove to the person, the triage person, that something's
exaggerating, that I'm here because I really feel something's wrong. Like, I've got to prove and fight to you that I'm not doing the most. Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I remember him asking me, so why did you come by yourself? And I literally, like, was about to break down crying. I'm like, yo, I just told you I just had a kid. Like, I'm not bringing my child in the hospital.
Right.
I'm not bringing him in the ER. Like, he hasn't had any shots like that. Like, I don't want him to be susceptible to anything lurking in this hospital. So I was like, you know, I had to come by myself. He's like, okay, I completely understand. They sent me back to the emergency, you know, to a room. I was sitting there for a while, and doctor came and he was like, okay, well, he looked at my wound. He looked at my, because it was the same hospital that I actually delivered in. So he looked at my chart. He was like, yeah, I see that you had an infection, you know, and your doctor gave you antibiotics.
And they're still not telling you what type of infection at this point.
No, they didn't tell me what type of infection at that point. And he was like, okay, we're going to run some extra tests. So they took a swab of my C-section. There you go. Took a swab of my C-section, and then they ran that test. And then they were like, okay, well, we're going to go and do an MRI. Now, listen, I'm all for an MRI, but they wanted to do the ink MRI, which meant that they would put the ink in my system to make it more of an HD picture. And I remember
that you're a new mother, right? And you're breastfeeding,
right. So and what's crazy is a Black lady working down at the MRI area, and she's like, "I just want to let you know, when you take this exam, you're not going to be able to breastfeed for 24 hours." And she was like, "It's your choice. You know, you can take it, you can get the test done or not." Okay, you can get the test done or not, but you can't breastfeed for 24 hours. Now, mind you, I'm here by myself. I'm downstairs. I can't get a phone signal. Like, I can't call anybody to, like, give me some advice, or like, I'm trying to get my mom on the phone or somebody on the phone and just give me advice about what I should do. So the doctor comes. He's like, all right, you ready to do it? I was like, honestly, no. Like, my child is only a couple months old. Well, at this time, he was a month old. Clay was a month old. I don't have enough milk supply backed up, and I have not talked to his pediatrician about formula. So I don't feel comfortable doing it right now. And he was like, well, you can get your pediatrician on the line. I'm like, I don't have a signal down here. I'm trying to call his pediatrician. Like, I can't get her on the phone, and I don't feel comfortable just making a whim of, like, yeah, let me go get my child some formula, and him not being able to take it, or him have a reaction or anything of that nature. And I didn't want my child to be on formula. That was not a part of my plan. So he clearly was getting a little agitated. So he goes and prints up this document and says, like, yeah, I just want to print this up. Like, this is coming from, the Association of American whatever, right? Like, they're saying that you can breastfeed after you take this.
Sir.
And I'm just like,
not my child.
Like, I'm good. Like, I'm okay. I'm good. And then he brings in another doctor, and the doctor is like, listen, like, I just had a kid, and, my wife and I, we interchangeably go from formula to breast milk, and it's okay. Like, it's fine. I'm like, first of all, your child is probably 3 months old or older. Right. And I'm like, Clay is a month old. Like, he's not 3 months. He's a month old. No, I don't feel comfortable with that. And it was just like, okay, well, if you don't get it, then you're going to have to sign this document saying that you refuse treatment.
Okay, I thought I had a choice, though. So how am I refusing treatment by saying I don't want to go this path?
Right. Like, it was just a whole debacle about, like, okay, well, now you're not doing what's best for you. Now you're not putting your health first. I'm like, it's just not that easy. And the fact that you don't understand that it's just not that easy is like crazy to me, when you can do a regular MRI. That's the crazy part about it. Like, you don't have to have the HD version of the MRI. Exactly. You can do a regular MRI. And, so I did a regular MRI, nothing came up from the regular MRI, and then they still made me sign the form that if something was to happen, I refuse treatment, which was fine. But then I get a call the next day from the emergency room. This was crazy. I get a call from the emergency room doctor first. And he's like, hey, just got your results back. You did have E. coli. You had E. coli infection when you left the hospital from your C-section, but now it's showing that you have a staph infection. And it didn't show up on your first results, but it's showing up now. And I'm thinking in my head, like, like, okay, mind you, this whole time I've been having a nurse come to my house every single day to restuff my bandages, to take out the old stuffing and restuff it, because I didn't feel comfortable doing it by myself, and my doctor made sure that it was a nurse there. So now it's like, did I already have the infection and you just gave me the wrong antibiotics?
That's what it is.
Or the scenario could be, did I get another infection from my nurse while she was trying to care for me? And that's a possibility too. But a staph infection, and the staph infection that I had, you can only get this infection in the
hospital. Yes.
Right. So, it's beyond crazy. And it's so crazy because he called me so sympathetic on the phone, and I'm thinking in my head, like, it took you to get my results for you to, like, see that something's not right.
Right.
So then I call from my doctor literally a few seconds later. Like, few seconds right after the emergency room called me. I guess they realized that, it's in her file, so we need to like douse her up immediately. So she's like, yeah, I got your results back. I see that, you had staph infection too. We're going to put you on a different antibiotic. Like, she just seemed like, now she's like very forthcoming and just like open, and okay. I mean,
like, why can't I get that level of service from the start is the question.
Right.
Like, why is it such, like you said, I have to fight. I've got to fight to even prove to you the reason that I'm here. Like, this kind of happened to me when I was in the hospital in 2016. It's like, I'm telling them that there was a Black nurse. She came in and she puts this line in my arm, and so they're sending like a barrage of different nurses in there, and for whatever reason they'll take out the line, put it back in, take out the line, put it back in. So they don't know how to accurately put the line in, so it keeps falling out, and I'm just bleeding everywhere. I'm being stuck up 20 times every hour, it seemed. And so finally, one of the doctors comes in, had an attitude, really did. And she looked at me and she's like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna put a line in your neck."
Oh no.
I said, "That's not happening. Not happening." She's like, "Well, it has to happen." I said, "Well, I can go home." "Well, if you go home, you're going to die." I said, "Okay, well, I'm good with that. Me and Jesus are on good terms, so I'm good. Like, I'm going home." And she's like, "No, let me send another doctor down." So she brings another doctor down, and white doctor, and he's like, "Well, what's the problem? Why exactly are we doing, putting it in her neck?" And she's like, "Well, it just won't stay in her arm. She has very small veins, blah, blah, blah." I said, "It was fine when that black nurse put it in there. I don't know what y'all been doing since, but it was fine when she put it in there." And so, they had, at this point, I think there were about 3 or 4 doctors all looking at me, trying to convince me that I needed to have a line in my neck. And the lady walks by, that black nurse walks by, and I said, "Hey, her." She comes in, looks at my arm. She said, no, I put that in there. So I know that's good. And there's nothing wrong with her veins. So she comes and she looks and she's like, "Who took it out?" Of course, it's 1,000 different ones came in there. So she looks and she grabs my arm, and honey, in 2 seconds, she puts it back in there. And the doctor says, "Well, then there's no need to go in the neck. You really didn't have to go in the neck." So I'm like, okay, had I not really been like, "Look, lady, you're not going in my neck. If you can't get into my arm, what makes you think I'm going to trust you around my neck? Are you crazy?" Like,
Nope.
I had to fuss and fight. I mean, she was saying that I was being irrational and all of this stuff. Like, I was making a hubbub, but I'm really not. I'm telling you, you don't need to do that. And, I had to go through all of that to prove to you that you didn't need to do it, and that it had something to do with your error, not mine. It's not something wrong with my body, and
Right.
I just, oh girl, it bothers me every time I talk about this topic, because there are so many Black women, and like you said earlier, you didn't even really want to go back to the hospital because you already know what you have to deal with going there. So a lot of the times they'll say that the cause for the extreme rates of death for Black women is because of the fact that we're not seeking healthcare. But it's not that we don't want to be seen. It's just that we know what we're going to have to deal with when we get there. So if we can't handle what we can handle at home, we try our best so that you don't have to go through what you got to go through when you get there.
Absolutely. It's crazy. And I remember while I was pregnant and I was going through the experience, I saw an article on Facebook about this young lady, had a master's degree. She was traveled the world with her husband. They were pregnant with their second child. She had to get a C-section on her second child. And her husband kept telling the nurse, like, "She's bleeding. You need to check her." And they literally like, "Oh, we'll be back. We'll be back." And like hours later, she's still bleeding and she lost her life.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was, and I hate to say this, but if it was somebody of another race,
it's the truth,
and she just happened to be like, "I need you right now," then it would be a different story. And I will say this, thankfully, I had some amazing nurses when I delivered. Had 2 nurses because the doctor actually changed. I had one doctor at one time, and then the shift changed while I was in labor. So then was another doctor that ended up being there. And the 2 nurses that started with me stayed with me. They literally were like, "Okay, we know our shift is over, but we just want to make sure you get out of your, C-section." Okay. So they literally waited until I woke up in my room before they left for their session, well, for their time to end.
Nurses
And I just
are
was
amazing, right? Nurses are so amazing, especially when you have nurses that are empathetic and kind and open to what's really going on. Like, they can be that bridge. They can be that advocate for you sometimes.
Absolutely. So in hindsight, going through it, and I kept saying like, "Okay, I want a doula. And we waited too late to get a doula. And by that time, I'm like, okay, well, we just got to go through labor and delivery. Now, in hindsight, if I would have known that my doctor wouldn't have been there, or, you know, I would go through everything, I think that I would have fought harder for a doula. And should God bless me with having another child, like, I will have a doula by my side the complete way through. Because you need somebody there that knows both sides of it, that can say, like, I'm here to make sure she's going to be okay.
So do you, it sounds like you do agree with a lot of, especially African-American women, have begun to seek out doulas. I think it's extremely important for any Black person, anytime they're dealing with healthcare, that they need to have some type of advocate for themselves somewhere.
You broke up, Kim. What did you say? Okay.
I said, well, have you, with noticing how a lot of African-American women have been seeking doulas, what are your thoughts on that? But it seems like you do agree with that, because I just believe any Black person dealing with the healthcare industry needs to have an advocate, period. Regardless if it's for childbirth, for whatever, you need to always have an advocate when you enter the healthcare system. But what are your thoughts on having a doula, seeking a doula out, the importance of a doula? Because, you know, a lot of times, I've noticed that we're moving back towards having those midwives, and the world, society will tell you, oh, it's not so safe. You need to definitely be at a hospital, blah, 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 to kind of deter that, because of course it's money. But what are your thoughts on seeking a doula and anyone who may have questions on the legitimacy of having a doula?
Well, so for me, you know, I had endometriosis and I had fibroids, and, you know, I really wanted to have a home birth in the water and all that good stuff, but I couldn't. Like, I knew that I needed to be in a hospital setting. I am for, you know, I'm not against having birth in the hospital, but I am for having a doula while in the hospital.
Right.
I feel like, you know, even the hospital that I gave birth to Clay, they had doulas that were available, but unfortunately it just did not align. Like, there was nobody available for the time that I needed a doula. Like, apparently there's a lot of people having kids around that time.
Yeah. Well, that's something to think of. I mean, I didn't even know that they have them on standby in certain hospitals. I guess you have to research the hospital that you get birthing at and seeing if that's available. That is an option. So that's cool.
Yeah. So even if the hospital doesn't have doulas, there's a lot of women out there, and I think for me, I just waited to the last minute to try to find a doula. Like, by that time, I'm in my third trimester, you know, and I'm like, okay, I need a doula, when I should have been looking for a doula once I got pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the truth about it is that as an African American, we don't have the luxury of waiting to the last minute. You know, you just don't have that luxury, because you do need an advocate. I think if anything I want you guys to get from this show today is that, you know, the Dope Black Chick is always about keeping it real and telling you what's real about this life. And this life that I live as a Black woman, I recognize I don't have the benefit of waiting to the last minute, because things like this will happen if I don't have an advocate, you know, to stand beside me. So I have to prepare. We gotta have to get ready for stuff before it even happened, you know, 10 years ahead. So that's just the life that we live as Black Americans. And so I think if anything that you get from this today, especially if you're a woman who is having a child or planning to have a child, start the planning now, because you will need an advocate in that room with you.
Absolutely. And I just want to say that, you know, with this whole race that we have going on, our presidential race that's about to happen, and these Democrats coming up and saying that they want to be, you know, our next president, we have to push them to talk about women health care and women and our rights. And I literally was back and forth on Facebook with somebody, because I posted an article about Elizabeth Warren morning bringing up the topic about, we really need to advocate for Black women and get this rate down.
Right.
And,
I saw that post.
Like some people really are just like, okay, like there's nothing we could do. This is what it is, or whatever the case may be. Like at the end of the day, if we save one more life, it's worth it. If she says like we need to go ahead and put money towards it, put money towards it. Like that's how reform starts. And if they're not talking about us, if they don't realize that we're going to be the changing vote, then we have to force them to have the conversation. Like it's way too important, and it's too many of us dying senselessly who are intelligent Black women. Like this is not just happening to women in areas of low income. Like this is happening to women who have PhDs.
Exactly.
This is happening to women who are famous. This is happening to women across the board. So imagine a young girl or a woman who doesn't have the knowledge set that we have going into a hospital. Can you imagine what's happening to her? And they understand that our vote is going to be the changing vote. Like at this point, if they're not having the conversation about it, then they're not my candidate.
You don't get my vote. I'm serious. Great. Thank you, Kyla, for coming on and sharing with us today on the Dope Black Chick.
Thank you for having me.
No problem, sis. You're all that. Thank you, Clay, for joining the show and giving us your stuff. But guys, that's going to be it for the Dope Black Chick podcast. Make sure that you head on over to Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts. We're streaming there as well. Subscribe, rate, review, all of that good stuff. And as always, peace and blessings.